Blessed are those who trust in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord. However, cursed are those who trust in mere mortals and make mere flesh their strength. We heard this pair of opposites in the first reading from the book of Jeremiah. And then came Jesus after having chosen his disciples, and he was presenting a similar pair of opposites that is even more puzzling at first sight, saying, "Blessed are you who are poor, hungry, weeping now, and being hated on account of the Son of Man. All you are blessed." Then he adds, "Woe to you who are rich, satisfied, laughing, and well spoken of. All of you are in danger." If we listen carefully to what both Jeremiah and Jesus were saying, we should be shocked, or at least puzzled. Every time we hear these strange sounding teachings of being blessed, whenever we trust in God rather than in humans, or that if we are poor, hungry, weeping, or hated, we should consider ourselves be blessed or honored rather than to be pitied, these kinds of thoughts are supposed to sound like paradoxes. And indeed, they were meant to challenge our usual way of thinking and usual way of feeling. After all, from a mere human perspective, the state or situation of being poor, hungry, weeping, or hated never is considered to be anything close to positive, let alone considering oneself to be blessed and in a spiritual bliss rather than a misery when one happens to be poor, hungry, weeping, or hated. As for the idea that if one is rich, fully satisfied, having fun, and enjoying a good reputation, then one should be worried rather than happy, I don't think anyone could believe that unless one is either a mystic or a fool. Obviously, the Bible in general and Jesus in particular have a very different understanding of how one could be regarded as someone who is blessed or honored, as opposed to someone who is cursed or in a spiritual state of danger. In our modern and postmodern times, not unlike in other centuries before us, our human value system looks at everyone who is wealthy, who is not lacking in basic necessities, who is having fun, or who is famous as something very positive and desirable for all. From a hedonistic or a consumerist perspective, though, being wealthy, being satisfied, being carefree, and being popular are the ultimate goals in life that everyone should try to reach before their time is over. From the spiritual perspective of Jesus and the Bible, however, hedonistic and consumerist ideals in general turn out to be the very obstacles to our relationship with the Spirit of God, the breath of the Almighty, as opposed to the case of being poor in the sense of not having all that we need right now, or being hungry or thirsty, i.e., longing for all that which we need, and weeping, the manifestation of our sadness or grief, or being hated because of our identity as the followers or disciples of the Master. All these difficult challenges and situations in life could become the very instances when we could experience God's healing and consoling presence with us in the very midst of our vulnerabilities, when God could touch our souls, when we could find comfort with God, who is able to satisfy our deepest desires for meaning and transcendence. These are some of those biblical paradoxes or controversial teachings of Jesus that do not seem to translate easily as good news for everyone, because the deeper meaning is heavily wrapped in a package that looks more like bad news at first sight. So, what do we do with these paradoxical teachings? One way to look at these difficult teachings of Jesus is to see that he's inviting us, 21st century listeners and disciples of his, to ponder our own life experiences and see when is or when was our relationship with God, the ultimate source of all, stronger and deeper rather than weaker or shallower. On the one hand, whenever we are suffering because we don't have something we need, is it not so that we start to think of God more? Maybe we start to rely on God more. And if we cannot find any help we need, we might even fully surrender ourselves to God and God's power, more likely. On the other hand, whenever we feel that we have everything we need, when we are fully satisfied, worry-free, admired and appreciated, do we even remember to be grateful for all that we have and enjoy, let alone giving thanks to God, the ultimate source of all there is? To be more direct and honest, are you thinking of God more often when you are suffering, or whenever you have a really good time and you feel like you could not be happier? If we're truthful, we would acknowledge that most of the times when we are suffering, we have almost an instinctual tendency to turn toward God and ask for help. Whereas when we are having a really good time and everything seems to click, then we rather tend to ignore our relationship with God. Isn't that so? If that's not the case, though, meaning that you think more often of God when you have a good time as opposed to when you struggle, then you may be a very rare exception in the whole human race and human history. Or you may have a character just like the guy in the joke who was driving down the street in a sweat because he had an important meeting and couldn't find parking. Looking up toward heaven, he said, "Lord, take pity on me. If you find me a parking space, I will go to church every Sunday for the rest of my life and give up drinking." Miraculously, a parking space appeared. The man looked up again and said, "Never mind, I found one." In any case, I think that it's a good thing to remember that being blessed and experiencing God's presence in the here and now, according to Jesus, is never the result of being wealthy, being fully satisfied, being happy or famous, and vice versa. If and whenever we happen to experience poverty, hunger, sadness, or hatred in any of its forms, that does not mean that we are cursed or farther from God, as it is usually assumed by almost everyone. Jesus, the teacher and healer, at the very beginning of his ministry, invited all of his followers to consider seriously that the opposite of our common assumptions might be true. That is, if we happen to be poor, hungry, sad, or hated because we are his disciples, then our experience would help us to be open to God's presence and thus to be blessed. Whereas if and whenever we find ourselves to be rich, fully satisfied, having a lot of fun, and when everyone happens to say all the good things about us, then we could be in danger of losing our connection with God, the ultimate reality. Perhaps because if we are rich and famous, having fun and being satisfied, there is a danger that there will be not enough space left in our lives for anything else than satisfying our selfish ego and having our self-interest in mind all the time. And if so, then we may easily be tempted to be concerned only about that which is within the horizon of the material world and within the boundaries of our merely human dimensions of life, thus forgetting about our relationship with our divine source and losing sight of the eternal dimensions of our life, which is our divine goal. The central message of today's gospel passage, I think, could be condensed into this short sentence. The ultimate meaning of human life, according to Jesus, is to be found in our relationship with the divine eternal I am, through whom we exist, and in whom we are and move and have our being. The divine eternal I am, who is the one beyond everything we can imagine, but who's also with us, close to us in all circumstances, and who is even within us as the life-giving breath. By the grace and power of God, Jesus invites us all to see that our spiritual bliss is not the result of the fortunate circumstances of our lives, but rather we are or could be blessed even and especially in the midst of the unfortunate circumstances of our lives, because and insofar as we manage to keep alive and grow in our childlike trust in our Creator, Sustainer, and Redeemer of our being. In conclusion, I would like to leave you with a quote that is coming from one of my favorite authors, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who is perhaps the most famous Anglican of the second half of the 20th century, who passed away only recently, and whose book, God Has a Dream, a vision of hope for our time. This is how it looks, if you like the visual illustration. God Has a Dream, that he wrote in 2003, got into my hands. I think Emmy put it on my desk. And I couldn't resist but start reading, actually rereading this 150 pages long book, and that which is very powerful and inspirational. It could serve also as a spiritual guide, especially in our socially turbulent times. So here is the short paragraph that I would like to read in its entirety, in the hope that you will be motivated and encouraged throughout next week. This is Desmond Tutu speaking through his book, God Has a Dream. Quote, "The Bible places human beings at the center of the divine enterprise as creatures of infinite worth and dignity, independent of our work, our ability, or our success. We are each created by God, like God, for God." And I will repeat this. We are each created by God, like God, for God. Then Archbishop Tutu continues, St. Augustine, referring to this God capacity, this God hunger, this striving after transcendence, says of God, "Thou hast made us for thyself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee." Then Tutu adds, "We are that ultimate paradox, the finite made for the infinite. Anything less than God cannot satisfy our hunger for the divine, not even success." And here I would like to add the four characteristics mentioned in gospel passage today: wealth, satisfaction, fun, or fame. None of these could fulfill our hunger for the divine. And Tutu concludes, that is why everything else, if we give it our ultimate loyalty, money, fame, power, whatever, turns into ashes in our mouths. Our worth is intrinsic to who we are, depending on nothing extrinsic, whether it be achievement, wealth, satisfaction, fun, or fame, or whatever else. And who we are, according to this prophet of the 20th century, we are each created by God, like God, for God. May the Spirit of Christ enlighten our minds, fulfill the desires of our hearts, and heal our souls so that we may experience what it means to be blessed by God, even in our hunger for the infinite, in all the situations we encounter in our lives day by day, so that we may become the sources of blessing for others in return. Amen.